Hey everybody. We're going to start in 1 Samuel 17. You can go ahead and head on over there, 1 Samuel 17, and we'll walk through several chapters today. Last week, you walked through the account of David and Goliath, right? That was last week? Okay. I'm still jet lagged. I'm just glad I got here on that it's Sunday. And I knew that it was when you all showed up. So I haven't known what day it was for about a week and a half. So last week, David and Goliath walking through, this is the challenge of walking through familiar stories, right? To set aside the previous understandings of what you think you know about the story and attempting to read it afresh. And as we follow now the continued flow of God's redemptive plan, David plays a major role in that historical spectrum. He's placed into a position of influence in the court of King Saul. Shortly after Samuel had anointed him to be the next king, though Samuel had anointed him in secret, in an act to protect David, because if Saul finds out that someone else has been anointed king, Saul's going to kill them. And even as David leaves the battle holding the head of Goliath, which is just one of the coolest, most manliest ways to end a fight, to cut off his head with his own sword, almost instantaneously Saul becomes jealous of David. And on top of that, God had sent a distressing spirit to torment Saul. And we're going to look today at the escalating conflict between Saul and David and how a friendship, an unlikely friendship between David and Saul's son Johnathan acts as a buffer between the two and helps save David's life. Now 1 Samuel 18 picks up right as the army is coming back from pursuing the Philistines. But let's catch the end of chapter 17, verse 53. Then the sons of Israel returned from hotly pursuing the Philistines and plundered their camps. And David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now when Saul saw David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I do not know." And the king said, You inquire whose son the youth is. So when David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Again, I love that it keeps mentioning that. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." So the battle's over. It's been representative warfare. David represents Israel. Goliath represents the Philistines. Whoever wins the whole battle. And remember, Saul has promised his daughter as a bride to whoever wins this, which is why Saul keeps asking, "Whose son are you?" He's looking at the lineage of David because that matters to a king. He wants to know what lineage he's marrying his daughter off to. And it's a good lineage from the tribe of Judah. All's going well there. So again, he continues to ask rightly because of that. Chapter 18 seems to begin rather abruptly, but again, we try to make the story flow. Starting in verse 1. Now it happened when he had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Johnathan was knit to the soul of David. And Johnathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. And then Johnathan cut a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Johnathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, even his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and prospered. And Saul set him over the men of war. And it was pleasing in the eyes of all the people and also in the eyes of Saul's servant. So right out of the gate, we're introduced to Johnathan, the son of King Saul, the crowned prince. This is the next one who will rightly ascend to the throne over Israel. But nobody knows that God has withdrawn his blessing, his spirit, his favor from Saul and Saul's line. And it's now placed upon David and his line. Again, Saul doesn't necessarily know that. Johnathan doesn't know that. But here we kind of begin to assess, I think maybe Johnathan knew something was up. He gives him these gifts, his weapons, his own robe, almost as the sign of acknowledging, you're it. You're next. You're going to be the next one onto this throne. We don't know what Johnathan knew or when he knew it. But he has such affection for David. And you see that simile that's used. Loved him as his own soul. It's a very unique sort of phrase used multiple times, that his soul is knit to the soul of David. So these two guys understand one another. They have love and affection for one another. And the idea, again, knit together, strands coming together and overlapping one another to where they are inseparable. That's what's happening here between Johnathan and David. Their lives are intertwining in such a way that these two men are going to be inseparable. Now, what's sad and interesting, and you'll spend some time in your homework looking at this, there's a whole movement today among liberal scholars that would say, well, obviously David and Johnathan are homosexual. Because look at the descriptions of their relationship. In fact, we will read in a little bit, the love of Johnathan for David was better than the love of a woman. So they'll say, well, look at that. Obviously, they're gay. So we have biblical justification for homosexuality. What a ridiculous, wicked rewriting of the text. Because in our culture today, men can't be friends with other men. Men can't speak words of affection to other men because someone will say, that's gay. I hate that with every fiber of my being. Because men are indeed terribly lonely and lack real friends. And this is one of the stupid things that's contributing to that reality. And I absolutely despise all of that. And you will hear, how many men do you know who will regularly say to other men, I love you? It's not a common thing. So when we see it in the text, it's so uncommon to our ears that we don't know what to do with it. So it's rewritten. And again, I tell people a lot, you need to travel with me to other countries and watch grown men hold hands because it's a sign of affection in their culture. That you don't do that in America. That's not a thing. If you see two men holding hands, it's a very clear conclusion for you to draw. You drive through India, you drive through Ghana, very common. Not just holding hands, fingers interlocked. That's serious. Because this is what friends do. You walk hand in hand. Because men could and should rightly show signs of affection one to another without being accused of wickedness. So Johnathan has this connection to David. They have this deep friendship, and they make this covenant together. And Jonathan's sign of the covenant is to give him his robe, to give him his belt and his sword and his armor. So, this is the representation of, this is the prince's robes. These are the prince's signs of authority. And it seems that Johnathan is passing the right to the throne to David, a foreshadowing of events to come. So after the battle with Goliath, Saul's actions towards David, verse 2, took him that day, did not let him return to his father's house. He's not kidnapping him. He sees the signs of greatness in David that at that point he likes. He won't for very long, but at this point he likes. and puts him into his own court, keeps him close, sets him over the military men. So David becomes the general over the military, which is what happens when you go out and whoop Goliath in about 10 seconds. You get promoted really fast. So he goes from no one to in charge of Israel's fighting men, and rightly so. Gives him this wonderful command. And how does David do? He succeeds in everything that he does. God grants him success and favor in all of this. And then that positive stuff turns sour. Verse 6. And it happened as they were coming, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with gladness, and with musical instruments. And the women sang as they were merry and said, Saul has struck his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul became very angry, for this saying was displeasing in his eyes. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they have ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on. Well, it didn't last long, did it? So it's going well at first. Wow, this is a great up-and-comer. And the incumbent gets jealous of the young up-and-comer. He's now a threat to me and my kingdom, and he will forever view him this way. And we'll see this for chapter upon chapter to come as Saul does this. All because the women come out, and it's the women who come out because all the men are at war. The women are the only ones who are left. So they come out to meet the conquering soldiers coming home. Their husbands are also, and their sons are also part of that group. And the women begin to sing this very famous song. And Saul doesn't like it at all. I get that. Saul's got a bit of an ego. Kings usually do. And he doesn't like that someone else is getting a bit more attention than him. So, in the midst of the celebration, Saul responds by saying, I'm going to keep an eye on him. I'm suspicious of him because he's now a threat to my throne, which is just goofy because that was never the case. David never did that. David never took advantage of any of that, and he could have. And we'll see that in the passages to come. On two separate occasions, David has the easy opportunity to kill Saul and to take the throne. And David's military force that's with him, even when he's in hiding on the run from Saul, tell him, this is your chance, kill him now. And David refuses to touch God's anointed and trust that God will give him the throne whenever God decides he's going to give him the throne. So David was never a threat, not even for a moment. Verse 10, now it happened on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul. Again, we've seen that before. We'll see it again. And he raved in the midst of the house. Now David was playing the harp with his hand as usual, and his spear was in Saul's hand. Then Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped from his presence twice. Saul was afraid of David, for Yahweh was with him, but had turned away from Saul. Therefore Saul turned him away from his presence and appointed him as commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David was prospering in all his ways, and Yahweh was with him. And then Saul saw that he was prospering greatly, so he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David, here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be a man of valor for me and fight Yahweh's battles. For Saul thought, my hand shall not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. But David said to Saul, who am I? What is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law? So it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Maholathite, as a wife. So you got to imagine that you work in a hostile environment when you're playing the harp, which apparently David can do. Remember, he's the sweet psalmist of Israel, writing all these great psalms. He can accompany himself with the harp. He's learned out in the field as a shepherd how to play instruments. and write incredible poetry and songs. Again, you see the dichotomy of David. Cut off David's head with his Goliath's head with his own sword, and I'm going to go write a song about it. He's got one foot in both camps. This is a good man, a manly man for sure. But as he's there calming King Saul, Saul hurls the spear, sticks it in the wall on more than one occasion, and David has to flee. Sets him as a commander, go fight some battles, not because he trusted David to go and win, but because he hoped that the Philistines would kill him. Which is a stupid thought, because he just killed Goliath. But there isn't another Philistine who could compete with that. Nor would they want to fight David, because David killed Goliath with a rock. It's probably not somebody you want to mess with. So he tries to kill him, doesn't work, offers like he promised the daughter. And notice David's humility. Who am I? I'm a nobody to be the king's son-in-law. My family's not worthy of such a thing. I mean, this is a big deal to be marrying now into royalty. And then Saul pulls it back and gives the girl away. Verse 20. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. So they told Saul, and the thing was right in his eyes. Saul said, I will give her to him that she may become a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David, for a second time you may be my son-in-law today. Then Saul commanded his servants, speak to David secretly, saying, behold, the king delights in you, and all his servants love you. So now become the king's son-in-law. So Saul's servants spoke these words in David's hearing. But David said, is it trivial in your eyes to become the king's son-in-law, since I'm a poor man and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told to him according to these words which David spoke. Saul then said, thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry, except 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. Now Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Then his servants told David these words, and it was right in the eyes of David to become the king's son-in-law. So before the days had expired, David rose up and went, he and his men, struck down 200 men among the Philistines. Then David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Then Saul saw and knew that Yahweh was with David, that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. And the commanders of the Philistines went out to battle, and it happened as often as they went out that David behaved himself more insightfully than all the servants of Saul, so his name was highly esteemed. We've already gotten glimpses of Saul's stupidity, his sin, all that has caused God to withdraw the blessing from him, the favor from him. And it doesn't get better. It just gets worse. Saul spirals away. But you can see now the scheming behind the scenes that King Saul is doing. Using his own daughter as a pawn. Oh, this is a good idea. If I can give my daughter to him, I'm making my daughter happy because she loves him. But then I can lay out this whole thing because he can't afford the bride price and all of that. So here's what I'll do. I want 100 foreskins. That's a unique wedding gift. 100 foreskins of the Philistines, because to get those, you do have to kill those men. They don't give those voluntarily. Hoping, in an effort to get her as a wife, he's going to die in battle. And he doesn't get 100 of them. He gets 200 of them. Because this is David. David doesn't lose. He's got God's divine favor on his life. And now we see this repeated refrain. Even Saul sees that Yahweh was with David. Now we've heard that before, haven't we? And Yahweh was with Joseph while he was in the prison. And Yahweh was with Joseph in Potiphar's house and caused all that he would do to succeed. Now the same thing is happening with David. No matter what's going on in David's life, the good and the bad, God is the one orchestrating it, protecting him, helping him make sure that he is successful. So Saul's trying to get rid of David, can't get rid of David, and now not only is Saul's son loyal to David, Saul's daughter is loyal to David. So there's this whole shift occurring. Not only are the people and the troops moving over in loyalty to David, Saul's own family is moving over in loyalty to David. And Saul is not stupid. He can see the writing on the wall. He knows what's going on. He can see it. And his jealousy then continues to grow. As we look back at the anointing of David, we can see Saul's constant attempt to endanger him. It's all doomed to fail because God had said, that one's mine. That's my king whom I install on my holy hill, Psalm 2. Ultimately, referring to Jesus, the greater son of David, who will be enthroned over God's people for all eternity, but in context, that's David. I have enthroned my king on Mount Zion. Let the nations tremble before him, which means Saul isn't going to win because God has said, this is my man. So now we have this clear contrast between Saul and David. Blessing on David, removal of blessing on Saul, and it's driving him nuts. So let's talk a little bit about the dangers of jealousy. This is a wicked sin, isn't it? So in our culture, jealousy comes out in a number of ways. You have the popular phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, or the Kardashians, whichever you prefer. What is that doing? It's promoting jealousy. Look at what they have and all that you don't have. And you should have it. You deserve it. You deserve all the good that could ever come to you. Everything should be handed to you on a silver platter. Which is scary to have a generation grow up thinking that they're entitled to anything that they have. Nobody's entitled to anything. The only thing you are entitled to biblically is hell. Everything else is a gift. So we don't look at this sense of entitlement that, yeah, I deserve this, or even I've earned this. Anything better than hell is a blessing. Jealousy is evil and dangerous. You want to get off course spiritually really fast? Be jealous. Be jealous of someone around you. So how often do you pray for God's blessing to be a windfall in someone's life other than yours? I mean, genuinely. I hope you pray it a lot. Jealousy will keep you from praying that prayer, that God would bless other people, that he would outbless them more than you. I mean, we might pray, God bless them, secretly assuming that our blessing will be greater than theirs, because there's always a pecking order. But what if it's not? What if they get everything that you wanted for you? Are you going to handle that well? This happens in church world too. And pastor world, and every now and again it'll come out in conferences or in books, and someone will say, you pray for God to do this great work in your city and to reach people and pour out this great blessing, this sense of revival. What if God answers that prayer, but he does it through the church down the road, not yours? Do you still want it to happen? What if all the blessing that you want to have happen in your own church happens to that pastor in that church? You okay with that? Ugh. That's no bueno, is it? Yeah. And we want to say, well, of course I am. Of course. Yes. We're not in competition. Even if they think we're in competition, we're not in competition. We're all on the same team. It's all good. But then when I lay my head on my pillow at night in the dark, is that what's going through my head? Oh, God, I'm so glad that you would do that for him. Not usually. No, my sin nature kicks in. Well, wait a minute. What about me? Our church is better. I mean, I'm biased, but it's better.
I'm biased, but it is better.
Well, thank you, but yes, you're definitely biased. and correct, but biased. Yeah, that's the way it goes. This is tough stuff. Jesus said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. What if God poured out abundant blessing on your enemies and those who persecute you? Maybe they won't persecute you. Hopefully, or it'll make it worse. This is hard stuff. Jealousy is very, very, very dangerous. Biblically, the word for zealous and the word for jealous are the same word. So context determines how they're translated. So there is a right sense of jealousy. There's a godly form of jealousy. We don't always talk about that one. So husbands and wives are rightly jealous for the affection of the other. So if a spouse feels that their spouse is flirting with someone else or paying too much attention to someone else, they're jealous. That's not a sin. That's right and good. They ought to be jealous. That one's mine. There's all the other ones you can have. I don't care about you having any of those, but that one's mine. You can't have that one. She's spoken for. So there's a sense that this can be righteous and holy and good. This word for zealous and jealous is applied directly to God himself. For our God is a jealous God who desires the affection of his people and rightly desires and demands it. And if you offer it to someone or something else, he is rightly jealous for the affection of those that he gave his life for. So there is a sense in which this is good, to be zealous for him, jealous for his name, for his glory, but be really careful, because before you know it, that can slip into something sinful and wicked. So we see this in Saul. See the darkness that this jealousy produces in Saul, because that's what's happening. Chapter 19, verse 1, then Saul spoke with Johnathan his son and all his servants to put David to death. But Johnathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David. So Johnathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, is seeking to put you to death. So now please be careful in the morning and stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak with my father about you. What I perceive, I will tell you. Then Johnathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, do not let the king sin against his servant David. He has not sinned against you, and since his works have been very good for you. For he took his life in his hand and struck the Philistine. And Yahweh brought about a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and were glad. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death without a cause? And Saul listened to the voice of Johnathan, and Saul swore, as Yahweh lives, he shall not be put to death. Then Johnathan called David, and Johnathan told him all these words. And Johnathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as formerly. So now it seems like things are going well. And isn't it just like God to have already knit together the souls of Johnathan and David, this depth of intimate friendship? And who is it that Saul goes to say, I want you to kill David? To his best friend. Well, that's not going to go well for Saul. God's already set it all up as an act to protect David by ensuring that they have become these close friends. And now it's not going to work out. Johnathan stands in defense of David. Don't kill him. He's innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. He's been nothing but a loyal servant to you, and it works. And now he's back in the king's presence. That will not continue. Saul will try to kill him again. In chapter 20, you've got some different events that happen, and we'll trust that you just pick up and listen in on what happens there. Read those accounts. There's some incredible things that happen again between David and Johnathan, and Saul's mad again at David, trying to kill him again. And then there's this new moon festival. David's not going to go and sit at the king's table and eat, because if David goes, Saul's going to kill him. So he hides. And he and Johnathan work out this deal. Johnathan, you go. And when the king notices that I'm not there, tell him I went home to Bethlehem to do a sacrifice with my family. If he responds positively to that, then I'm good. If he responds poorly to that, my life's in danger. So they make this deal, and then Johnathan would get news to him of how he reacted. And it's this high drama sort of thing there in chapter 20. And David's gone. Jonathan's sitting there, and it took until day 2 for Saul to realize David's missing and asks where he is. And Saul gets so angry. He gets so angry not only with David, but with Johnathan, he tries to kill Johnathan, which is always bad. Saul's trying to protect his throne to give to his son, and is so protective of that, he'll kill the son who was supposed to get the throne. That's just dumb. But this is the darkness that comes about in his life because of his jealousy. He'll kill anyone and everything to get rid of David, including the next one to be on the throne. So Johnathan goes out like he's promised and passes that message on to David. And even though he's been defended, and there's this elaborate plan they have of shooting an arrow in a field, and if it's not as far, Jonathan's going to yell out instructions to the kid retrieving the arrow, but the message really isn't for that kid. The message is for David to communicate to him. And Johnathan says, you got to go. You have to flee because he will kill you if he has the opportunity. The child goes back in the house, and Johnathan and David have this strong moment where they weep together because this is goodbye. And they're going to separate, and they're hugging. The text, again, this is why it's so rewritten and misinterpreted. It says to kiss one another. It's a sign of affection. So they're hugging and kissing one another, weeping together. They're exchanging gifts. And this is the context where it says that his love for him is greater than the love of a woman. There was a closeness to them that was unmatched in the other relationships of his life. And David has to flee for his life and will be on the run for years from King Saul, who will leverage all of his power, his military might, to track down, to hunt, and to kill David. But at least at this point, David's still alive because he had a really good friend. So let's talk about that for a couple of minutes. Let's talk about your friends. Do you have a good friend? I'm not talking about a lot of acquaintances and knowing a lot of people. Do you have a friend? That person that when it all goes down, you can call them and they're going to answer. And they're going to come running. They're in your corner. They're for you. They're with you. I can't speak to you, ladies. I can speak to how it works with men. The answer is no for most men. 90% of American men say they lack a single true friend. 90%. A lot of factors contributing to that. And women, it's true for you too. So we're not going to say this is only true for men. It's just not the case. Read all the stats. They're terrible across the board. For whatever reason, we have decided that friends aren't necessary. That we can get by in life with some surface level relationships with people around us, some coworkers, some folks at church that we know by name and say, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Good to see you. How are things going? But that's as far as it goes. And because that was an issue, we invented this thing called social media, which is neither of those things. It's not media nor is it social. It further isolated. And then we even decided we were going to have friends through that. We even called them that. They're not. Just because you see a picture of what they had for lunch doesn't make them your friend. That's not friendship. That's just weird. In fact, one of the factors that led me to completely cut out social media years and years ago now was I decided I don't care what my second grade teacher had for lunch, nor do I want to see a picture of it. That just doesn't matter to me. So and it became an avenue by which I was criticized. So it's like, well, delete. So all that's gone. I have 0 forms of social media, and my life is all the better for it. And many in this room and in this church have done the very same thing. And that's freedom, friends. Pure freedom. To not even not even know what's going on in the world. It's fantastic. Ignorance is truly bliss when it comes to those things. But we've tried through these technological avenues to fabricate friendships, and it's utterly failed. Because the only thing that you can be friends with is another person, face to face, regularly, in relationship. You have to be vulnerable, you have to open yourself up, be known, you have to talk about things that are hard to talk about. You have to listen to other, you have to care about somebody other than yourself, and you have to care about what's happening in their life and let them speak. You don't get together and go, hey, the only person's day that I'm going to ask about is me. Let's go out, I want to talk about me for the next hour. You're not going to have any friends if you do that. So there's this ongoing back and forth in those friendships. And if you don't have that, find that. Find it. Go start asking. It's okay to say, I don't have a lot of friends, and I need one. Can we grab some coffee? Can we go to lunch? Whatever. Because my life is missing some sort of an element that God says I need. And this account with David and Johnathan absolutely proves that. You need this. You will not survive without this. You cannot live in this sense of isolation. And I get it. Already some of you are internally going, nope, doesn't apply to me, and I'm an introvert. I'd rather stay home anyway. Guilty as charged. So I'm a natural introvert. I get peopled out. When I go home on Sundays, I don't talk all afternoon because I've been talking to you for hours. And I don't want to talk anymore. You know, that social gas tank goes straight to E. And there are some who would rather stay home by themselves and watch a movie anyway. I get that. Stop caring about that. Do something hard. And that might involve leaving your house and talking to a real person for a change. You'll be fine. You will survive, I promise. It will be okay. So I hope you have that. If you do, today, reach out to them to say thank you that they are that for you. Because you should be grateful that you have that. Early on in my days here, we're coming up on 8 years. Goodness gracious. Time flies when you're having fun, friends. None of us thought it would last this long, so it's okay. In those early days, we knew no one. We parachuted in, and we've talked about some of this before. We're strangers here. We're not townies. I didn't graduate high school here. So there's this sense of being an outsider. And again, this is why I'm so grateful for Dave Carso. At one point when I was complaining about that, he was like, well, you're just going to have to get over that. Yes and amen. Because that's what it's going to take. You just have to get over it. Because everywhere is like that until they're not. Everybody's an outsider until they're not. And anybody can become an insider. That's just how it works. But in those early days, we had to make, I'm looking at Dennis on purpose, we had to make some controversial decisions in the life of this church and say goodbye to some people, and other people then said goodbye because of those goodbyes and all that. And I was a stranger. That's all I am. And I understand that. It was very lonely, very isolating for sure. Now, the elders were wonderful. Elders' families were wonderful. Several on the staff were wonderful. But there was still this void because, all right, we're together in all of this, but there was still a sense of isolation. It's just the way that it goes. And almost 3 years in, out of nowhere, I got a text message from a guy I had never met. It said, hey, I'd left, years passed, came back. I would love to talk to you, talk about theology, just have a cup of coffee. Would you like to do that? I hadn't gotten a text like that in over 3 years. And Guy Parkerson and I went and grabbed some coffee. And everything changed because I had a friend. that wasn't an elder. Certainly they were and are friends. Wasn't a staff member. Was just a guy. He was just a guy. Huh, see how that works? So is his son. A guy. And we have since developed that friendship, and it's now multiplied, and our life is rich with friendship. That was not the case for a long time, but it is now. And friends, it's so much better. There's no going back. I would never wish that on anybody, to the point where I go on a missions trip for 10 days with my friend, Chris Swing. Yes, Chris is an elder, and yes, Chris is a faithful servant in this church and all that, but Chris is my friend. We had a ball. It was just the two of us. We had so much fun. I hope did some okay fun things while we were there that were helpful to them. But at the end of the day, we had a blast because two friends hopped on a plane and traveled the world together. Laughed a lot. We're not even sick of each other. It's amazing. I mean, well, I won't speak for him, but I'm not sick of Chris. So yeah, I don't know what it's going to take for you to welcome that, to find that, or maybe you're the one who sends the text and says, hey, let's meet. But please, I beg of you to do that. Because as that isolation increases, because it's just going to get worse with technological advancements, and our world is utterly insane and getting worse, it seems, by the day, there are friends to be had, and they're everywhere. Good and godly people are everywhere in this church, and they would love to be your friend, because they're probably lonely too. So figure that out and send that text. If that text comes to you, respond, reply to that text, and say, you bet, I would love to. That's your reply, okay? I wrote it for you. You don't even have to think. You bet, I would love to. And see what God does, because God has a special way of working in our lives that only happens through our friends. It doesn't happen through our spouses. He does work in our lives through our spouses for sure. Through our small groups and through classes and through the stuff that we do here and through coworkers and neighbors and all that. Absolutely the case. But there's a special, unique work that he only does through really, really strong friendships. They get us through a lot of the darkness. So go find who that is for you. And don't just look for a friend. Be a really good friend. All right. That's David and Johnathan. We like them. They're good friends. Let that be a model to follow. 1, 2, 3, go team.